So welcome everyone to to an afternoon of mindfulness, which includes qigong. The qigong is actually a dynamic form of mindfulness, just like walking, even running. If you run mindfully, that's mindful running, or swimming, of course, mindful swimming. Now, I would like to introduce you to a very unique practice I learned some years ago in Thailand. And it's originally from Laos, just north of Thailand. And this one person, he learned it, and then he introduced it to Thailand. And now it's very popular. And I learned it from his students, because he had passed away by the time I got to Thailand. And wherever I go, I like to share this practice because, as you know, many people have difficulty with mindful breathing. And you find even though you might have experience with mindful breathing, you find that sometimes you try to meditate, but for some reason you just can't focus your mind. This happens to all of us. Even people with a lot of experience. It just happens because that's just the nature of the mind. So this practice, place your palms on your knees. Now, if you're right-handed, you start with the right hand. If you're left-handed, you start with the left. I'm just curious, who's left-handed here? Who's left-handed? Okay, there you go. Who is one? Okay. Yeah, we're about to do this very unique practice. It's a dynamic form of mindfulness that comes from Southeast Asia. And I was just saying, if you're right-handed, you start with the right hand. If you're left-handed, you start with the left, okay? So just be aware of the palms on your knees. And then raise the right or left palm up like this. Can you see at the back? Okay. Then slowly lifting. Then slowly to the stomach. And be aware of your hand touching the stomach area, the abdomen. Then the left or right palm up. Lifting slowly to the stomach. Be aware of the hand touching the other hand. And keep your hands very loose, very relaxed, not tight. So then the right or left hand goes up to the chest. And you're aware of that touch in the chest area. Then out, down, touching the knee, then palm down. Then left or right hand up, touching the chest, out, down, and down. Again, right or left palm up, lifting to the stomach. Left or right, into the stomach. Up to the chest, touching, out, down, and down. Up to the chest, down and down. Again, right or left. Stomach, to the stomach, up to the chest, up to the chest, right or left, stomach, so you're aware of each movement and when the hand touches the body. So it brings you directly into the present moment. And you begin to feel the rhythm of the movements. Now, as we do this, be aware of any thoughts which arise in the mind, just like when you're doing mindful breathing. And you just bring your awareness back to the hand movements and the hand touching the body. So this is how we train the mind to observe and to let go of thoughts. We're doing the hand movements, raising the right palm up, stomach, left. your left hand, left to left. Yeah. So you can do this with your eyes open or eyes closed. Again, if there are any thoughts which arise in the mind, just be aware of it and let it go. Just keep coming back to the movements and the touch, the hand touching the body. This practice also leads us into a deeper understanding of who we are. Okay, so we'll just now do just some mindful breathing for a few minutes. Is there anyone new to mindful breathing? Okay. As you know, in this practice, one has to be patient with the wandering mind. And of course, you don't try to control the mind, or you don't try to achieve something. So that's just craving. Now let us do this reflection. And this is from the forest tradition. As you know, the Buddha and those early monks, they lived mainly in the forest. So just be aware of the body breathing. That is a physical process. Because we're a process of body and mind. And in the Pali language, the physical process is termed rupa, R-U-P-A, rupa. And the awareness of the body breathing is mental process or mind phenomena. So the body breathing is a physical process, rupa, and the awareness of the body breathing is the mental process, known as nama. So you see there is only physical and mental process. Mind, body, phenomena. Rupa and nama. No permanent I or me. Just like when we were doing the hand movements, it's the same thing. The hands moving and touching the body, that is the physical process. And the awareness of the hands moving and touching the body is a mental process. Rupa and nama. And likewise, say when we're doing mindful walking, the feet moving and stepping, that is the physical process. And the awareness of the feet moving and touching is mental process. Rupa and nama. So whenever you're doing any kind of mindful practice, you can do this reflection. Whether it's the breathing, the hand movements, or walking. Of course, it's good to wait at least 15-20 minutes when the mind is fairly calm and clear. Then you can see clearly Rupa and Nama, just process. And of course, we're alive because we're a process. It's a very complex process. And because we're a process, we have to recharge it on a regular basis, in the same way that you recharge your cell phones. And of course, when you're in the forest tradition or you're in a long retreat, It's very easy to see this. In all your activities, including when you're doing mindful eating in silence, and when you're washing the dishes, or sweeping leaves, or sweeping the floor, you can see this fact of just physical and mental process. Only rupa, nama. No permanent I, no permanent me. As you may know, when the Buddha began to teach, or he began to share his profound insights, when he became awakened, he was the first person, the first yogi or forest monk to realize that the self or the ego or the soul is really a Western word. Normally in Asia they don't use that word soul. The moving meditation we did with the hands, you missed it, but it's all on video. We will give you the link. It's very easy to practice. So he was the first person to realize that the self or the ego was not something permanent, something that was separate from, nature and the world. With very profound insight, because all the ancient civilizations, all of them, believed in a permanent self or ego or soul, simply because they were just trapped in thinking. They had no insight, they had no practice. And from that belief that the self or the ego was something permanent and separate came the belief in reincarnation. That when the body died, which of course it must eventually, that this seemingly permanent, separate self would continue into a new body. And in India, they still believe that. So it was such a profound and radical insight, no one could understand it. And even the monks, it took the monks several months, several years to really understand it. So the Buddha tried to teach this profound insight in different ways. And the first way was just what we did, trying to see just body and mind as a reality. Because initially when you hear that, we're actually this body-mind process or physical and mental phenomena, it is just an idea, it's just a concept. But when you apply mindfulness on a regular basis, you begin to see the truth of it, the fact of it. It's no longer an idea. And what is interesting too is that it's very easy to overlook this fact that we're this process. Although it is so obvious that we're a process. But we easily overlook this fact simply because we're social creatures. We use language and we use labels, I, you, he, she, and we use names. So we get into our human world or human convention. And so we tend to see each other as personalities, as egos. And of course, some egos are bigger than some, right? That's the nature of ignorance and delusion. And another way he tried to teach this was from seeing the reality of body and mind, the process of it, was to see within this body-mind process, there are 5 factors. Some of you might have heard this before. Sometimes it's called aggregates. And in the Pali language, it's called sakandhas. 5 things that create our daily experience. Quite fascinating. And to see how they're interconnected, interdependent. And then he went a bit deeper, and you have 32 body parts. You can find a list somewhere. And then he went a bit deeper, and there are 6 elements. Maybe later on I'll have some time to go into the elements because it's really fascinating. And again, when we first hear that we're composed of these elements, it's just an idea, it's a concept. But when you have the time, you go through the body and see different parts of the body and which elements are involved, then you begin to see the reality of these elements. And you begin to realize that we are alive because of these elements. Quite fascinating. Because if you really want to know what continues after death, which is the million-dollar question, because people have been asking this question for centuries, well, thousands of years. What happens to me when I die, and where do I go after death? Very ancient question. You can call it the age-old question. It's really the elements. When you really investigate, you begin to realize it's the elements, they go back to nature. But there's no aspect of the personality, the self or the ego, that continues. Even though the I, the self, wants to continue somehow. But we can discuss that later. It's a fascinating subject. Because our minds have to deal with the great mystery of death. And death has always been a great mystery, the great unknown. And because our normal thinking mind cannot understand the unknown, then naturally there's a fear of the unknown. And even the elements, there is a deeper reality than the elements. And that's atoms. Now, during the Buddha's time, they were not aware of atoms and molecules. But now we know that they exist. Now, incidentally, How many of you experience stress in the workplace? Okay, perfectly normal. There's even stress in monasteries, in some monasteries. When things get too busy. Or one monk is not really practicing according, to the Buddha's teaching. He gets very corrupt, very deluded, and he gives problems for the other monks. It's like that. Because it's the same human condition. And we all have these mental defilements. Yeah. How many of you watched the video, the talk I gave on Thursday? Did some of you watch it? Anyway, it's there. It's there on the website. Yeah. But it's really good to reflect on these elements, because the more we understand our mental defilements, and we all have them, the more we have a better understanding of human behavior, including our own behavior and other people's behavior. Especially when people behave in a very rational, crazy way. Because I'm sure sometimes when you see people behaving so irrationally, you always wonder, how can these people do something like that? And we usually say, oh, the person is crazy, he's insane, or they're evil. I know in this country, some people like to use that word evil, right? I guess it comes from Christianity. But according to the Buddha, no one is really evil per se. They're just simply suffering from ignorance and delusion. Because mental defilements are really strong. And this is why his main advice was do wholesome actions, avoid unwholesome actions and thoughts, and make the effort to purify the mind. Because these mental defilements are like pollutions. And we're all conditioned with them. Because our minds are a result of conditioning. Beginning in the home environment, then in school, formal education. From elementary school, high school, college, and so on. All our minds are conditioned. And some of us are conditioned with religious beliefs, right? And sometimes superstitious beliefs also. Now, for those who are experiencing stress in the work environment, there's a very simple practice that you can do. And it's from Qigong, from the Qigong practice. And what you do, as you breathe in, just raise your palm up. Can you try that? And then breathing out, palms down. Breathing in, breathing out. In, out. So you're aware of in-breath going up, out-breath coming down. And although it looks simple, but when you practice it, you realize it's a very powerful practice, especially when you're in a very busy, stressful environment, because it really brings you immediately into the present moment. And you can focus and just release some of that stress. And it can be emotional stress also. You know, you're upset, you're irritable. Okay, so you can experiment with it. Next time you're at work, what, Monday, maybe Monday? It's very useful. And when I meet medical people, you know, nurses and doctors, I show them this practice, including this one, hand movement, yeah. Because, you know, hospitals get pretty crazy, right? Yeah, I used to do volunteer work in emergency at a medical center in Ontario, so I know what emergency department can be like, yeah. And also, one of the radical teachings of the Buddha was learning how not to react. Learning how not to react to unpleasantness. Or, you know, if people's trying to give you a hard time, he said, when you see, just see. When you hear, just hear. Now, it sounds simple, but it's not easy to practice, right? Because we are brought up to react by habit. It's one of our conditioned behavior. And this is one way you can learn how not to react when somebody is being unpleasant or trying to give you a hard time. Just do this, focus, you smile to yourself, and you ignore that person. Ignore them. And you can imagine that person will be very puzzled and confused with what you're doing. You know, what the hell are you doing? Because you find that when you don't react to somebody, you know, who's being very negative, that person has no power over you. You understand? But of course, if you react and get angry or upset, you're caught. You're caught by that person's negativity. And also, when you don't react and you keep just calm and clear, you begin to see it's that person's problem. You understand? They're having a problem, not you. And they're behaving that way because of their mental problems. Yeah. It's a very profound teaching. When you see, just see. When you hear, just hear. And the more you're mindful, you can appreciate the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting and responding. Because when you don't react, your mind is calm, your mind is clear. So if something important needs to be done, or if somebody needs your help, you can respond in a beneficial way. You see the difference? Yeah. And a good example, say a child. If a child is in danger, you can respond and you act. Different. We can reflect on that. This reminds me of a story. A friend of mine in Toronto was once doing like a 3-month work project at some company. And the supervisor was a lady, and she was behaving in a very unprofessional way. She would come in the mornings and she would start bitching at people. You know that word, bitching. Now, when I'm in Asia, I have to explain what the word bitching means, but you all know what it means. I mean, she was obviously having problems. At home, you can imagine. And the interesting thing is that she was not aware of her behavior. She was just acting out, her frustrations and anger from home, either with her husband or with her children or both. Just acting out. And I guess, being supervisor, she just had no awareness of her behavior. So the friend said to me one day, do you have any advice to deal with such a, challenging person? I said, well, you can try this. The important thing, you don't react and you don't get angry with her. Because sometimes you'd be tempted to tell off this person. Keep calm. And one morning when she's behaving like that unprofessionally, just say to her, I'm really sorry that you're having problems today. Please tell me how I can help you. I'm really sorry that you're having problems today. Please tell me how I can help you. And I said, you must try it. The important thing is that you do it. And don't be afraid. And you're only there for 3 months anyway. And he did. And he called me up, 2 or 3 days later, and he said, thank you so much for this advice, because it really worked. Because first of all, when he said to her calmly, I'm really sorry that you're not feeling well today, it made her aware of her mental state, because she wasn't aware of it. She was just acting out. And then by saying with kindness, please tell me how I can help you, she responded to that kindness, because obviously she was suffering. And she changed her behavior, yeah. And he was able to introduce her to mindfulness, to be more mindful, yeah. I remember once I was in the South Island of New Zealand. What's the name of that city? It is a British name. No, Queenstown is where they have the bungee jumping. The original bungee jumping started in Queenstown. No, it's on the east side. It has a British name. Anyway, don't worry, I'll think of it later. Thank you, Christchurch. And initially, only British people could live there. The natives couldn't go there. But now it's more international now. And we had a one-day retreat at the Sri Lankan temple. And one lady was very unhappy, Sri Lankan. And she told everyone about, her problems. So one of her friends told me why she was unhappy, because the lady was too unhappy to tell me herself. And her problem was basically her son, who had moved out of the house, living with his girlfriend, and he refused to see her. She also had a daughter, which was totally different. She lived at home, and she was very kind, very supportive of her mother. And what happened, her husband had died fairly young, or when the children are young. I could think he had a heart attack. It was very difficult for her, being a single mother and so far away from her, all her relatives back in Sri Lanka. Very challenging. And she made the mistake of feeling very sorry for the son, that he was without his father, and so she spoiled and pampered him. Rotten. And when you spoil and pamper a child, when they grow up, they're not very mature human beings. They tend to be very self-centered, very demanding. So he was like that. So, of course, we're doing mindfulness, and I said to the lady, first of all, you have to understand that you're responsible for the way your son turned out. But of course, she thought she was doing the right thing, but it was not sensible. And I said to her, you cannot depend on your son for your happiness. You just have to let him go and be patient. Maybe one day, he'll be more mature. And you must be thankful that your daughter is living with you and is very supportive. And then I said something that she was not expecting, or she had never heard this type of teaching before. I said, what is really causing you suffering or problem is not your son per se, but it's your obsessive thinking about your son wanting to come and visit you. Because when you practice mindfulness, you look at the mind. Because all our suffering and conflict, fears and anxiety comes from the mind. It all begins in the mind. And after we had the discussion, we went outside. Weather was beautiful, and we did the Qigong movements. And during the Qigong movements, she completely changed. And everyone in the group saw the change in her. Because, she was so unhappy, right? And she was telling everybody how unhappy she was and her problems, blah, 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 blah. But by doing the Qigong, she was able to let go of those obsessive thoughts about her son. Everyone saw the difference. She was smiling and just moving, moving with the qi, the energy of the movements. Yeah. So later we'll be doing some Qigong. Okay, so you can, your handout on mindfulness, I think you all have one, right? Yeah. Let's start at the fourth paragraph. Mindfulness is a skillful way of relating to and connecting to life and daily experience. It is paying attention on purpose in the present moment and in a non-judgmental way. It is a way of being, and it takes practice. It is calm attention to what is happening from moment to moment without discrimination or criticism. It is the observing power of the mind that sees without the filter of desire or aversion, liking or disliking, or delusional reaction. It is therefore a wholesome way of seeing what is happening in the present moment. And we go to the top. First paragraph. Mindful breathing or hand movements brings the mind home to the body. You begin to experience calmness, a sense of well-being and quiet joy. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. This helps our concentration and focus, and we begin to appreciate the fact of being alive instead of being distracted and confused by compulsive thinking. Now, this knowing is intuitive knowing. It's not intellectual knowing. Because intellectual knowing, of course, is based on thinking, memory, and knowledge, information. That's what thinking is. But intuitive knowing is something very different. Like when you breathe in mindfully, you know you're breathing in, right? When you breathe out, you know you're breathing out. When you're hungry or tired, you know you're hungry or tired. You see the difference? It's not something you think about. When you have to go to the washroom, you know you have to go. It's a natural intelligence. Just like when you're crossing the road, you look right, left, right, and you know when it is safe to cross, right? Natural intelligence. Just like when you're driving, you know when to stop, when to turn right, when to turn left, and when to change, when to change lanes. Or overtake someone. Mindful walking helps us to be in the present moment, and we can appreciate the beauty of the environment. We can stop and smell the roses and experience the joy of just being alive. Mindful eating in silence is a peaceful activity, and we can appreciate the food much more. When we're eating and talking, what we're talking about becomes much more important than the food. The food becomes a secondary thing. Now, one thing you can try if you're feeling stressed at work, when you're having lunch, try to eat mindfully in silence instead of scrolling on your smartphones. I've watched many people scrolling on their smartphone during lunch, right? I know it's a habit. Just try it. Put it away for even 10 minutes. And believe me, the world is not going to come to an end if you don't check your messages. Because of the anxiety we have, right? You think, my God, if I don't check, the world is going to come to an end somehow. But believe me, it will not come to an end. It's just the nature of anxiety. Okay? Mindful cleaning, cooking, and washing helps us to enjoy doing these activities instead of being in a hurry to finish them, so we can do other things. Present moment, wonderful moment. With mindfulness and calm focus, we can deal with our own suffering or anxiety, fear, and worry, frustration, irritation, anger, resentment, sadness, and sorrow. You can embrace your mental, emotional upset and take care of it with compassion, kind acceptance, and patience. Mindfulness has the power to heal past traumas and conflicts because it is a state of non-duality, and so one is able to be objective and see things as they are without identifying with them and let them go. We'll be speaking more about this, about non-duality and duality. Mindfulness also helps us not to react to unpleasant words and situations, and not to take things so personally. A great deal of our mental energy is caught up in habitual reactions. It is our reactions which make us burn out, which throws us off balance and cause us suffering and discontent, dis-ease. Things get better in our lives when we react less and less. We can remain calm and patient, wise, strong, and secure. then we can respond in a beneficial way and be helpful to others. Our basic problem in life is that we take things too personally, even things that are not directly related to us. This is an aspect of ignorance and delusion. Mindfulness is much more than you think. Our lives are not determined by what happens to us, but by how we react to what happens. Not by what life brings to us, but by our attitude we bring to life. The world is as it is. Life is constantly changing and uncertain. A calm and positive attitude causes a chain reaction of positive thoughts, events, and outcomes. It is a catalyst, a spark that creates extraordinary and surprising results. Events do not cause us suffering. They may cause us physical discomfort or some inconvenience and delay. It is our mental, emotional reaction to those events that cause us suffering. Upset, anger, frustration, anxiety, and despair. Without mindfulness, we are enslaved and deluded by mental activity, by too much thinking. This is a source of dukkha, mental emotional disturbance. We believe that to follow our impulses and satisfy our desires and expectations is freedom. This is an illusion. In fact, we're slaves to craving, clinging, frustration, fear, and despair. In mindfulness, one is not only restful, calm, and happy, but alert and awake. Meditation is not an evasion or escape. It is a clear and serene encounter with reality. We just skip down, third paragraph, second sentence. Our minds are conditioned to react. Our brains are programmed, educated to label, judge, criticize, condemn, compare, to like or dislike, to want or not to want, or to have aversion and ill will. This is the conditioning of our mental defilements. So this is our cause of our conflicts, discontentment, disharmony, and dis-ease. The idea of a permanent, unchanging ego center or self is strengthened by this conditioning. And it is this deep-rooted illusion of a permanent, concrete, and separate ego entity which is the cause and source of our problems and conflicts, fears and worry, craving, greed, and attachment. We can skillfully deal with our thoughts and emotions. With objective awareness of our mental landscape, we can see thoughts and feelings as just thoughts and feelings. Moods and emotions are just moods and emotions. We can see and understand their impermanent, changing, and uncertain nature, and can therefore let them go, just freeing the mind of suffering and dis-ease. Now, about mindfulness being a state of non-duality. What does that mean? It means that there's no I being aware or being mindful. There is just that energy of attention. Now, initially we don't see this because we're all conditioned with duality. Let me explain. Duality begins very innocently when a child learns to speak. And we all went through this. When a child begins to say, I like this, I don't like that. I want this, I don't want that. That is the beginning of duality, meaning subject and object. Okay? And the I is always the subject. You see that? Duality. I like something, I want something. That is duality. And this duality of subject and object becomes more deep-rooted in our minds when we start to identify with our sense experiences. Meaning, when we begin to say, I am seeing something, I am hearing something, I'm smelling something, I am tasting something, I am feeling something by touch, and I am thinking something. You see the duality. We're all conditioned like this. Here is one of the profound insights that the Buddha had. He realized there's no one who is actually seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Meaning, the senses are actually sensing by themselves. Now let's do a simple experiment. Close your eyes for a moment. Open your eyes. Close your eyes again. Open your eyes. You notice that when you open your eyes, seeing consciousness arises spontaneously. Did you notice that? In other words, you didn't have to make a special effort to see, right? As long as your eyes are healthy, you open your eyes, you look, and they're seeing. You see that? Just like hearing, you don't have to make a special effort to hear the speaker, right? As long as your ears are not, stuffed up, there's hearing. Same with smelling, it arises naturally. Just like when you're eating, tasting arises spontaneously. Now, if you're not too sure about this, next time you eat something, say to yourself, okay, I'm going to eat this thing mindfully, and I'm going to try not to taste this. See what happens. Because as long as we have taste buds on the tongue, tasting will arise spontaneously, right? So that was one of the insights of the Buddha. And of course, the body touches something, and automatically there is feeling, touch feeling. And same with thinking. As you know, most of the time we're not even aware that we're thinking, right? The mind is just thinking compulsively, habitually. And so we believe, when we say, I am thinking, we believe that there's a thinker thinking thoughts, right? Or there's a thinker separate from thoughts. But actually, there's no thinker who is thinking thoughts. It's very profound. Now, let's do an experiment. Again, close your eyes. And just think these three thoughts slowly. I am thinking. Again, I am thinking. Again, I am thinking. I am thinking. You see that I is a thought, am is a thought, Thinking is a thought. So I am thinking are three thoughts. In other words, the I is not separate as a thinker. The I is not separate as a thinker. The I is a thought. Can you see that? It's very profound. If you can't see this, this is your homework. Yes, you'll have a lot of time when you're at home, just experiment with it and you see that obvious fact. But because we're always using duality, we believe that there's an I who is separate from what we're seeing, right? We believe that there's a listener, a hearer, who is separate from sound. We believe that there's an I, as a smeller, separate from smells or odors. Again, we believe that there's a taster separate from food, from the flavor of the food. And we think that there's a feeler separate from touch sensation. And again, we believe that there's a thinker separate from thoughts. And that's why we experience that illusion of duality and separation. We think we're separate from nature, we're separate from the world, and we're separate from the universe at large. But it's an illusion. So this is one of the insights that the Buddha had. Very, very profound. Now, so coming back to the nature of mindfulness awareness, it is a state of non-duality because really there's no I being aware, being mindful. There's just that energy of attention. So it gives us the ability to see something objectively as it is. And this is now called mindfulness-based psychotherapy. Something that the Buddha taught, over 2,500 years ago. Now, we all have this habit of identifying with things, right? Whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. For example, say anger arises. First we experience the energy of anger, and then immediately we say, I am angry, right? Or I'm upset. Or I'm afraid. Or I'm frustrated. This is our habit. Likewise, a happy feeling arises, we say, I am happy, perfectly natural. Unhappy feeling arises, we say, I am unhappy. So when we have this habit of identifying with these emotions, we hold on to them as something personal. My happiness, my unhappiness, my suffering, my anger, my fear, and so on. Now, initially, when we say, I am happy, there is no conflict or suffering. Why is that? Because it feels good, right? It's pleasant. But when we say, I'm upset, I'm unhappy, I'm frustrated, I'm afraid, there is suffering in the mind because these states are unpleasant. And what the Dharma is teaching us is that whether something is pleasant or unpleasant, they are all impermanent. They're temporary mental states. They're changing conditions of the mind. And mindfulness gives us that ability. One of the miracles of mindfulness it gives us the ability to say, instead of saying, I am angry or I'm afraid, we have the ability to say, there is anger or there is fear. You see the difference? Or there is frustration. It gives us the ability to see something objectively as it is, without identifying with it. Because that is one of our habits we have, the habit of identification, and one of the causes of our suffering. And if you don't like the word suffering, call it stress. Mental, emotional stress. And this is how we learn to deal with emotions and moods. You objectify something as it is, know it is impermanent, and you let it go. And if emotions are strong, you do something physical, like say qigong, running, whatever you like to do, whatever physical activity you like to do. Because sometimes it's not easy to sit with strong emotions, right? And that includes depression. Because, depression has a very heavy quality to it. Yeah. It takes a lot of patience to deal with depression. But you just have to keep objectifying it and know it is impermanent. And of course, do something physical, yeah. And again, the basic truth that whatever we experience is impermanent, changing, comes back to this basic fact of process. Because who we really are at a deeper level is process. Constantly changing process of body and mind. Physical and mental phenomena. Rupa and Nama. Okay, are there any questions at this point? Any questions?
I'm having a hard time, like if there's no I, it almost feels like, where does accountability come in? Like if someone reacts, like do they, how do you like account for quote unquote like bad behavior, if that makes sense?
Okay, we do have an I. But you have to realize the I is not something permanent. It's just a label that we're using to communicate. But what happens is that the way we're conditioned, we identify with this I, we become very attached to it. In the same way, we become very attached to our names. But really, your name and this I are only social labels, for easy identification. But it's not who we really are. And that's an aspect of wisdom and liberation when you realize that. Because in this society, this culture, if somebody calls you by a wrong name or they forget your name, what happens? You get upset, you take it so personally. It's like your smartphone, you think it's going to be the end of the world if you don't check your messages, right? The anxiety, oh my God. See, it's like that. So the teaching of non-self is to understand, yes, we have a self, but it's not permanent. It's just a conditioning in the mind. But we'll go more into it afterwards, because it is profound. But to really understand the self at a deeper level, you have to understand exactly what thinking is, the thinking process. And unfortunately, this is not something that we're taught in school. But they should be teaching us in school because it's not complicated. It's not rocket science, as I like to say. And this was one of the questions I had that inspired me to go to India back in the 1970s. What is thinking? Because the mind is always thinking, right? And I saw that all my mental, emotional suffering, turmoil was caused by thinking. Worrying, obsessing, projecting in the future, becoming more anxious, right? More afraid. And I was wondering, is it possible for all this to stop? But initially you can't imagine, right? The mind being silent, you can't imagine it. And where I grew up, there were no Dharma books, no Dharma teachers, of course no internet at that time. And the only book I had was the Bible, because I grew up as a Christian. But by that time I realized what I was searching for couldn't be found in the Bible. I needed experience, profound experience and insight, and that's what inspired me to go to India. Yeah. So yes, there's something called karma, cause and effect, but it's really cause and effect in your daily life. So if you choose to do unwholesome actions, and you have unwholesome states of mind, your attitude, very negative, very judgmental, of course, you're going to see the consequences of those unwholesome actions. You see that cause and effect. That's right. Are there any other questions at this time?
Then let me make sure I'm clear. There is a self,
Yes.
but that it's an impermanent sort of conglomerate of all of these processes that are going on, our physical processes, our mental processes, and for this impermanent period of time, those processes are Jimmy. That's my name.
Yes.
And here I am.
And as I said, Jimmy is only a label.
And Jimmy is a label.
It's just a label, that's right.
Jimmy is not actually who I am.
Correct.
I am these processes. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy is how you can identify me.
Right.
How you can address me. How you can remember me, as opposed to Ron over there. Mm-hmm. So we're different in that way.
Right.
But we're not separate, because we're connected in various ways, in all kinds of different ways, particularly, and the way I understand it when you were just talking about karma, particularly around our behavior. I mean, I know from long exposure to this practice and these traditions that I am responsible for the consequences of my behavior. That's the idea, being responsible for my karma. My karma is my own. My behavior, thought, word, and deed has an effect.
That's right.
Has an impact, and has a consequence. And it can have an effect and an impact on Ron, for instance, or on you, for instance, or on...
From anyone, that's right.
And therefore, there's that connection in our behavior.
But initially, when we are not mindful, whatever happens, whatever karma we experience from our unwholesome actions and attitude, we tend to point fingers and blame it on others, right? But that's very immature and arrogant, ignorant behavior, right? We tend to look out. We're not looking here. And that's what the Dharma is. Look here. The world is here. That's right. The world is here.
That accountability comes in to me in this impermanent bunch of processes that are going on, nevertheless behaves and is responsible for and creates consequences and is responsible for those consequences.
Right, right.
Okay.
Okay. So, you see, we do need thinking in daily life, that's obvious. But what happens is that when we don't need to think, the mind keeps thinking unnecessarily, right? Compulsively, habitually. So we waste a lot of energy and we get trapped in our mental delusions. Because that's an aspect of delusion. And all the stories and mini dramas and fears and this might happen and that might happen, we're deluded by it. But with mindfulness, we can just say, it is only thinking, thinking, thinking. It's a very useful technique. It's called noting, mental noting. It's only thinking, thinking, thinking. And you come back to the breath or hand movements or walking. Very useful technique. And you realize it's only thoughts. It's not reality. But when you're trapped in it, it seems very real. And the same with our habitual reactions, right? When we're always reacting, we create our own mental, emotional reality. I'm sure you've noticed that. We're always creating our own mental, emotional reality. And we think that this reality is what is important. But actually it isn't. It's a source of our, suffering, conflicts, and our confusion. Yeah. Delusion is very powerful. But with mindfulness and investigation, we're able to awaken from this delusion. And I mentioned last Thursday evening, one of our delusions also comes from when we're remembering unpleasant memories. And we all have unpleasant memories. But when you remember an unpleasant memory, it can be something recent or a few weeks ago, or even a few years ago, you can still get upset. You can still get angry. You can still have regret, right? You can still feel guilty about something that happened a long time ago. And these unpleasant memories, they seem so real, so solid, because of the emotions that they evoke. But when you apply mindfulness, you begin to see that these unpleasant memories are actually just thoughts and images that are happening now in the present moment. Those thoughts and images may be related to past events, but the actual experience of the unpleasant memory is actually thoughts and images that are happening now. That is a miracle of mindfulness. And it's very liberating when we realize that. It is only thinking, thinking, thinking. Hence the name of this very popular book, which you all know, The Power of Now, right? A wonderful book. Very liberating. And we mentioned last Thursday that there's also delusion on a mass scale, especially when it comes to spectator sports, right? Football, soccer, or American football, baseball, whatever sport it is. And of course, if you're supporting a player or a team, what happens if that team is losing? Or what happens if the team is winning, right? And what happened, we are so caught up in wanting a certain team or a certain player to win, we forget that it's only a game, right? We tend to forget that. And during World Cup soccer, which is very international, every 4 years, I think, when people are betting thousands and even millions of dollars, it's no longer a game, right? It's no longer a game. But that's an example of a delusion on a mass scale. So the question is, can you watch a game or one of your favorite games, whatever that is, and just to be objective and not rooting for a certain team or player to win? Is that possible? That would be a good practice, wouldn't it? Just to watch it and just enjoy the game. And we said last Thursday, when it comes to guilt, because, you know, suffering from guilt is a universal problem, especially in Western countries. Because, as you know, it comes from the judgmental mind. Not only do we judge others, but we judge ourselves. And this is why when we make mistakes, it's important that we forgive ourselves for being human. Because we're not perfect. And everyone makes mistakes, everyone. Including monks and famous monks too. And as you know, I don't even have to mention politicians. Everyone makes mistakes. So you can say it is perfectly natural to make mistakes. And feeling guilty, of course, it is to have regrets. We can all relate to that. It's something very natural. But if we keep regretting and feeling guilty and torturing ourselves, that is not very constructive. And we mentioned last Thursday that guilt is an aspect of fear. Because of we tend to put a negative image on yourself, right? I'm so awful, I'm so stupid. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? I should have done that, blah, blah, blah. That negative image creates fear and conflict in the mind. But just having that general judgmental attitude. So this is where loving kindness practice is very beneficial. Because by doing loving kindness meditation, we replace those negative judgmental thoughts with kind, positive thoughts. May I be well, happy, and peaceful. May I be free from fear, conflict, and delusion. May all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May all beings be free from fear, conflict, and delusion. Very beneficial practice. When we have more practice, more reflection, and you understand how thinking, although we do need thinking, rational, logical thinking in daily life, but it's very easy for thinking to become very irrational, very illogical. Right? When it becomes, obsessive. When it becomes very negative, right? And you'll find that when we have a problem or a conflict, or thinking becomes very obsessive and repetitive, right? You've noticed that. You keep thinking over and over and over this problem or conflict. And somehow the problem or a conflict seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Have you noticed that? So what starts out, as a small problem or a conflict grows into this huge melodrama. Can you relate to that? And guess who's the star of the melodrama, right? But that's the power of delusion, from thinking. So you begin to see the use of thinking, just like the intellect and knowledge, but also its limitations. This is what I could mention when I'm in the university environment, that the Buddha did not have a PhD, in Buddhism or philosophy. And yet he was this profound, you can say, psychologist and psychotherapist. But again, without a PhD. It's quite amazing. And now they're using his method, mindfulness-based psychotherapy. Objectifying something, know it is impermanent, and letting it go. So when we have more understanding, we have more order in the mind. Order means when we need to think, we think logically, rationally, and we don't need to think, we put it down. We return to present moment awareness. Of course, these days, as soon as somebody has a free moment, guess what? The smartphone. They go to their smartphone. So it's good, your practice is to find a balance. Use your smartphone when you have to, when you don't have to, put it away. Yeah. And yes, the world is not going to come to an end. Believe me, it won't. It only seems that way, right? Because of the anxiety. It's quite amazing. Because the anxiety makes us, delusional. We're deluded by it. And this is why an aspect of meditation is learning just to be quiet, just to be still. Even for 20 minutes each day, obviously after work. Just to be in that state of timelessness, just being. Nothing to do, nothing to achieve, nothing to have, nothing to possess, nothing to get rid of, just being. There's great peace and freedom in that state of just being. And just to be free of time. Because it is thinking that creates time as past and future. So after the Qigong, we'll be going into the nature of the thinking process. Then you have a better understanding how the self or the ego is conditioned by the thinking process as past and future. And in that stillness, if we allow the mind to be quiet, we're in touch with the timeless dimension of the universe. And we're not separate from the universe. No beginning and no ending. Always was and always will be. And you begin to realize that the Big Bang and the Big Crunch are only a result of dualistic thinking. Beginning, ending. And all the scientists and the cosmologists are trapped in dualistic thinking. In other words, they need to do some meditation practice. Make space, make sure you don't hit anyone or hit anything. And if you want to hit somebody, you can hit them at the end of the session, not now. And feet apart. And just a little warm up, just breathing in, out, in, out, in, out. Little up, little up. Volume, volume. Music man, music man.
Yeah.
Billy, music man.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, can you turn up the TV?
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. You can even relax the knees a little. Okay. Hands in front, left or right, doesn't matter. Breathe out, breathing out, and then breathing in, down and up. And out. Up. Breathe in. Breathe. lot of chi comes from the legs. Which is why when you walk uphill, when you climb the stairs or you're riding a bicycle, very quickly arms out, breathing in and breathing out, slowly bending. Arms up, breathe in slowly, breathe out. In, out. This helps to strengthen the legs and energize the heart. Now from here, breathe open. Ah. And as you go you smile. Very good for frustration. But I like everyone to let it out. Don't be shy. Don't worry, we're all crazy. But this is good crazy. Yeah? This is not crazy. Okay? Breathe in. One more time. Okay, very good. becomes like our center of focus. Okay, and hands up. We do a side stretch, almost like a yoga. And just stretch to one side. Just breathe normally, feel the stretch. Change other side. Each deep rising. Okay. And breath up. Okay, and just relax the legs, feet. In case your feet are a bit sore. Next one is for the shoulders, because you know, a lot of tightness. Shoulders and the neck here, right? So the right foot in front. And you shift your weight from front to back almost. Feel and balance. Balance yourself. Now we can do a circle. Image, my generation. Clockwise and counterclockwise. Many people don't know it's like digital. We're going to go anti-clockwise. It's this direction. Correct. Breathe normally. Okay, and then we switch left in front. And again, just find your balance, shifting from front to back. This time we go clockwise to the right. Okay. Breathing in, breathing out. Okay. Are you feeling a little more? That's the shape. And just relax the legs a little. We're going to do the very classical movement that's also in Tai Chi. It's called hand right thigh balance. Bend your knees a little and just shift your weight from side to side, bending a little. Turn also, breathing in one way, out. we could go on for, until 12 midnight. Breathing in. Golden Gate Park, the Phantom Park. That would be a nice place. And just relax the legs again. And we'll go to the shoulders again. Begin bringing slowly as high as we can. Shoulders feel more relaxed later on. Okay, and you breathe in and breathe out. Normally we end with a standing one, but look if you want to do it. Or I just give you, you see. Because in China there's one school of Qigong where this is a new practice. Standing, stand up with one arm. initially when you stand 5 minutes, it feels like 1 hour. But I'll give you a sample of it. Hands close together. Do you feel anything in your fingers? Like tingling? Some people don't feel it initially, but later you get more sensitive. That's it. And it's related to the blood flow. So the next time you do any type of physical exercise, you do that, and in the standing one, you squat a little and you bend the knee. And while you do that, you're trying to discover centrifugal, like the knees are stiff, chi drop, and kind of flows up. Okay, you either bend to what we call soft knee, then chi flow, and it stimulates the internal organ. That's very helpful. Of course, you're aware body in this position is in breath out. Okay. Wow, that was 1 hour. For the hands, we're going to spread the chi from the hands over the body. Fingers together, breathe in, stretch. Okay, and then we bend a little. In. One more time. Okay, perfect. So we have a drink and then we sit with this wonderful chi.
The people, okay, so now everybody will know my problem. I,
Probably not the
Remember, it's not your
Okay.
problem.
Okay, well, I'll share the problem. My hands and feet always get cold and numb and tingly, and sometimes I get dizzy.
Yes.
And I was told that, yes, that's when I'm releasing the tension and all that. Is it
Yes.
just because my body tend to hold the tension
Right.
always?
Yes, yes. You must understand that a lot of tension has been there for a long time.
Is there an end to that?
Yeah. It's amazing. The body accumulates a lot of tension, you know, of course, if you've been through trauma, you know, it's there, even from childhood. It's quite amazing, yeah. But just observe it, just observe, and just see it as phenomena. It's just phenomena, yeah. And if you get tired anytime, you just sit and rest, yeah. And the wonderful thing is that when you sit afterwards, like now, you can be aware of the chi in the body, right? You can feel it, right? And you feel it in the mind, in the head. And some people have told me that the best sitting they've ever had was after Qigong, because they feel very grounded, you know, because the body is so relaxed, releasing a lot of, you know, accumulated stress, including emotional stress. You feel very grounded. And you can just feel the Qi. And again, when you're mindful and you do the reflection, again, you can see the body and the mind, you know, the physical and mental process phenomena. And initially, when I heard about this chi, I was very skeptical. But then when I did it, there were no more doubts, yeah, because I felt the chi very, very strongly. And very often people are so amazed by this, especially in Singapore and Malaysia. 'Cause Singapore, you know, very stressful place, and Hong Kong is even worse. They always ask me, "Who's your great Qigong master from China?" And when I tell them it's my sister from Toronto, they're always surprised. Yeah. But she learned it from a Chinese doctor from Hong Kong, but living in Toronto, in the Toronto area. And of course, what you're also experiencing is the heat element, or the element of fire. And of course, during winter, the reason why we wear layers, like sweaters and jackets, it's really to keep the heat element in. And if you go to the Qigong site on YouTube, you see there are two videos there. You can follow the shorter video. It's in a park. And it's about 36 minutes, I think. For the longer video, it's about 55 minutes, I think. But have a look at that one too, because the setting is one of the most beautiful places that I get to visit in Malaysia, at this Buddhist association on the East Coast. It's really a beautiful place. You see the rock cliff and the lake in the background here. And if you're inspired to follow the video, you don't have to do all the movements. Yeah. So when I got to India in 1975, I got the answer to my question, what is thinking? And I got it from this profound teacher. You might have heard of him, J. Krishnamurti, from India. And he was the one that said meditation is the ending of thought, thinking. It is a movement in silence and the unknown. And it just so happened, like 10 days previously, there was that experience of silence, total silence. And I say that because if I had read that without that experience, that meditation was the ending of thought, of thinking, I would have said, this is utter rubbish, not possible. But you know, when your mind is thinking all the time, it's hard to imagine a total silence. But I could understand it. And then he went on to say, thinking is a response to memory, past experience, and knowledge. You can add the word information. Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. And if you observe your mind, you can see that connection. Right? Memory, that's obvious, isn't it? Thinking and memory. Of course, past experience, memory, they go together, and knowledge, information. It's quite amazing. And it's not rocket science. And you can say every time we think, the mind is recycling all the information that's stored in the mind. It's very obvious. It's recycled information. And thinking has that ability to project in the future. Right? All our minds do this. We're either remembering something or we're projecting in the future, right? Planning and so on. So thinking is a movement in time from past to future, past to future. All our minds do this regardless of language. It's the same thought process. And we're conditioned with the idea of past and future because of the thinking process, the thought process. And thinking is limited, mechanical, overactive, and leads to confusion and delusion. Thinking produces fear, worry, anxiety, craving, greed, envy, jealousy, resentment, feelings of isolation and loneliness, and other emotions and mood. Thinking is time as past, present, and future. The self or ego, the idea of I, me, mine, is a product of the thinking process as a collection of memories. And you can see this especially when you meet someone for the first time and you speak about yourselves. Now, when you speak about yourself, what do you talk about? It's all personal history, isn't it? Which is based on memory. You know, all your childhood, your family background, right? Where you grew up, elementary school. Some people went to kindergarten, right? High school or junior school, whatever it is, college, and so on. You speak about, books you have read, movies you have seen, and now things that we see on the internet. And if you're in the working world, you speak about your work history, right? And if you've traveled, you speak about places you've been to and places that you'd like to visit next. So really, the self that we all have, which is conditioned, is really just a collection of memories based on history, personal history. And with that comes, our future projections, our plans, and so on. And this is why when somebody suffers from amnesia, temporary memory loss, why it is so scary and confusing, disconcerting. Because when you lose your memory, you don't know who you are. Do you see that connection? Yeah. Because the I, the self, is all related to memory, personal history, and so on. Very interesting. And then there is awareness, which is different, the unconditioned state of mind. Because our thinking is a result of conditioning. Education and so on. The media, society at large, home environment. But awareness never changes. It's unconditioned. In other words, the awareness we had as children is the same awareness we have today. The only difference is that young children don't understand this. But we have the ability to understand it now with practice, with mindfulness. So this is what the Buddha understood. He understood the conditioning mind, the thinking process. And the I, the self, the ego was not permanent. It was just a product of conditioning based on thinking, memory, and the use of language. And why the I seems so permanent, because we're using it all the time, when we're speaking. And of course, if you have to speak a lot, say in a day, you can use this I hundreds of times, right? I all the time. So it gives the impression in the mind, in consciousness, that this I is rock solid and it's everlasting. It is always there. We may see changes around us, even natural disasters, whatever that disaster is, but the I never changes in the mind. So it seems permanent, rock solid, but of course it's an illusion. So with mindfulness, we begin to see that the I is just a label that we use. And when the mind is very clear, very calm, you see the I, the label, is just a thought. Just a thought. I. And the awareness, the knowing, is our Buddha nature. It's called Buddha nature, or wisdom mind. And we all have Buddha nature. So the Buddha is still very much alive today in our awareness and knowing, that intuitive knowing. And as we said, our names are just social labels for easy identification. It's not who we are. So if somebody forgets her name or calls us by a wrong name, don't get upset. Don't take it personally. It's just a name. It's not who we are. Just like when you look in the mirror and you see that image, and half the time you're not pleased with that image, just remember, not me, not mine. It's not who we are. And you notice that image is always changing. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed sometimes you look in the mirror and you say, oh, today I'm not too bad. I'm okay. I'll never win a beauty contest or be a fashion model, but today I'm okay. And then 2 days later, you look in the mirror and say, oh my God, I look awful. What happened? Right? I need more makeup or a new brand or cosmetic surgery if you can afford it. But it's a good practice when you look in the mirror, not me, not mine. And one of the insights of the Buddha, he realized the body belongs to the changing conditions of nature. It is non-self. Because if you tell the body not to get sick, the body does not listen, right? The body will get sick due to certain conditions. Just like if you tell the body not to get hungry, not to get tired, not to go to the toilet, not to age, and so on, the body does these things, whether we like it or not, because it follows its own natural laws. It belongs to the changing conditions of nature. It is non-self, anatta. Very profound teaching, and also very beneficial when we understand that. And it's composed of these 6 elements that eventually return to nature. Of course, we have to take care of the body as best as we can, but we can't get too attached to it. It's only a temporary shelter, you can say. It's on loan from nature. It's just that we have to pay a lot of rent, right? While we have this body. But eventually we have to let it go. So this is one of the insights of the Buddha. And so he was able to find a cure for sickness, aging, and death. And when you realize the body was not a self, not me, not mine, then he saw that sickness, aging, and death were conditions of the body, and it was not happening to a self. You understand? He no longer identified with the body as me or mine, and therefore he no longer identified with sickness, aging, and death as mine. So there was calmness. There was no mental, emotional suffering. There was no attachment. He was no longer attached to it. Yes, he felt bodily pain, bodily discomfort, but he no longer identified with it. But of course, it takes practice. It needs training, and of course, it takes reflection like this. And also when we do this reflection of body and mind, rupa and nama, you see that there's no self that dies. Because normally, when there's a death, we tend to say somebody dies, somebody passes away, right? Because that's our human language, our human convention. But at a deeper level, there is no self, no person that dies. But rather, it's the body-mind process simply shuts down. Physical, mental phenomena simply shuts down. It stops working. And this is why when you touch a dead body, it feels cold. Because the heat element is the first element to leave the body. Because when the body-mind process shuts down, there's no longer metabolism, right? So therefore no heat. But when we just finish the Qigong, you can see the heat. Because we're still alive. Yeah? The body-mind process is still alive. So we experience the heat element. We don't have time to go into the elements, but I think it's in one of the links, I think. Or if you don't have it, I can give you afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions at this time? Any questions about the thinking process, the self? Yes. Yes, microphone, yeah.
So I have a
Yes.
question about self. Do you think knowing about the process of reincarnation help you to understand the concept of self? I ask this because, I mean, for me, it's easy to accept that it's part of the law of the universe. But I feel,
believe me, it's a common question. Very common.
yeah, I feel in the West, I think when people talk about Buddhism, this is not it feels almost like a taboo. Like people don't usually talk about it. I understand that. I don't think we need to know about reincarnation to live and live well. But I do feel sometimes when I see people are suffering, especially when it comes to their identity and the beliefs in selves. I wish people know about reincarnation, because if you know those concepts, you know that the impermanent nature of your body and personality.
But you realize, of course, having that belief is very comforting, isn't it? Right? Any belief in an afterlife, whether it's Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, is very comforting, isn't it? Yes. And that's why many people want to believe in an afterlife. And believe me, there are thousands of beliefs. You could do a PhD research on all the beliefs that humans, have created for the last, few thousand years. But I'm fascinated with this idea. And as you know, because the Buddha realized that the self, the I, was not permanent, naturally, he did not teach about reincarnation. But in his culture, of course, Hindu is a common belief. And in India today, they still believe that. And the Tibetans also believe it because they got it from the Hindus. But I always like to say, if you want to believe in reincarnation, rebirth, please go ahead. Because I know it's difficult. Because there's always the fear of the unknown. Because death has always been a great mystery, hasn't it?
Yeah, the greatest.
And that's why in Asia they believe that when somebody dies, they become a ghost or a spirit. The idea that they continue somehow, not in the physical form, but in the spirit world. And that's why, they do all the offerings, right? And the incense smoke. The smoke is very important, by the way. When they have, about Hungry Ghost Month in August. They believe all the spirits wander the earth during August, and they're hungry, so you have to feed them. And after you feed them, then you entertain them. I've seen this in Singapore and Malaysia.
But that's also a fear-based, I think, ritual, right? But
okay.
You don't have to bring fear.
But no, I understand. If you don't have the practice and the insight, you want to believe, which is fine. I always say, if you want to believe it, go right ahead. But there's a reason why the fear is there. And this is why it's important to understand the thinking process. It gives you great insight into this. Because as you said, thinking is based on that which we know. Memory, knowledge, information. You see that. And it likes to project itself into the future. That's just the nature of thinking. And the I is there, right? The self. So thinking comes upon death, the unknown, the great unknown. And thinking cannot relate to death, the unknown. You see that? Because it's based on that which it knows. And so it cannot relate to the unknown. And a good way of looking at this is like a fish. Think of a fish. It cannot relate to the experience of riding a bicycle, right? Or driving a car, or using internet. A fish cannot relate to those experiences. So likewise, our thinking mind cannot relate to the unknown. You see that now. Just think of the fish. So what does thinking do? There's fear, right? Fear of the unknown. This is incredible what thinking does. Because thinking has the ability to project in the future, right? So because it cannot understand the unknown, there is fear. So thinking projects itself beyond death. This is really amazing. It projects itself beyond death and says, aha, I will continue after death. And that's why human beings have created so many different beliefs. And reincarnation, rebirth is only one belief. There are many, many, many. It's fascinating.
Do you think the goal is kind of transcend the idea of thinking and use the idea of knowing?
Yes, of course, the Buddha or anyone who really follows the Buddhist path, you're able to transcend thinking. And here's the wonderful insight. When you allow the mind to be silent, to be still, and as you know, you can't force the mind to be still, but it takes practice, it takes patience. When the mind becomes still, when you allow the thinking process to become silent, in that silence is the unknown. Meaning the absence of thought. You see that? But you have to experience it and you understand it. And you're no longer afraid of the unknown in that silence of the mind. Because you experience the unknown as something very peaceful and it is timeless. It's a very profound insight. And so the question, you know, the age-old question, what happens to me when I die and where do I go after that? It does not arise. You see that? Because there's no fear and there's no duality, the sense that you're separate from the world, separate from nature.
Thank you.
Yes. Because actually we're aspects of nature, we're aspects of the world in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself, experiencing itself. And at a more cosmic level, we're aspects of the universe in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself, experiencing itself. Okay? Yeah. We're almost finished. Any more questions about this? But just reflect on it, and just read. Read the handouts. Listen to the talks. Yeah. But you see that once you understand the thinking process more clearly, it explains a lot of things. Yeah. But I always tell people, if you wish to believe in an afterlife, go right ahead. Yeah. Once I thought of writing a book, of just going around asking people the same question. If you could come back after death, or if you could have, rebirth, reincarnation, what would you like to become in your next life, and where? Where would you like to be? The native North Americans, they like to believe that heaven was the great hunting ground in the sky. You might have heard this. Because hunting the buffalo is one of their favorite activities, right? Hunting the buffalo. So if you like McDonald's, you might, be reborn in the great McDonald's in the sky, or Pizza Hut, or whatever, whatever you like, your idea of heaven, you project that. It's fascinating. Yeah. But very quickly, just feel the hair on your head. Despite all the shampooing and conditioning, it's the earth element, right? Earth. Feel your fingernails, that's the hard quality, that's earth element. Feel the bones in your fingers, calcium, magnesium, earth element, right? Now feel the bones in your knees, they're bigger bones, calcium, magnesium. And inside there's heat, there's water. As you know, we're 70% water. Run your tongue over your teeth. Again, feel the hard quality, calcium, magnesium, earth element. Feel the wetness in the mouth, water, right? Think of tears, water. And if you taste your tears, what do you taste? Salt. What element is salt? Earth element, sodium chloride. But in this case, it's dissolved, right? It's not hard, like bones and teeth. Think of sweat, perspiration, same thing, water, and of course salt. Think of pee or urine, which is part of our daily experience, water, minerals, of course salt is there. And if the pee is fresh, it's warm. There is the heat element, the fire element. Then we go to blood. You have water, you have salt, minerals, and iron, right? The iron in the hemoglobin, that's the earth. So in blood, the earth element is very prominent. You have heat, and you have oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. So the air element is also prominent in blood, like the earth element. Yeah, fascinating. And of course, we have heat because we're the process, right? Metabolism. And if you breathe mindfully, we're in touch with the air element, right? And at the same time, there's the element of space. We experience the space in the lungs, right? As it expands, element of space is there. There's a lot of space in the body when you go into it. Now just feel the back of your hand. Earth, water, heat. And air. And you go below the skin, flesh, muscles, sinew. Of course, you have the internal organs. Earth, water, heat, and air. And when the mind is quiet, we experience spacious awareness, right? Because normally awareness is spacious by nature, but we don't normally experience the space because of thinking. Thinking takes up all the space in the mind. We go to the air cavity, there's space there, which allows sound vibration, giving rise to hearing consciousness. You open your mouth, there's space in the mouth cavity. Space in the esophagus, stomach, intestines, and of course in the lungs. And we're able to eat and drink because of the space in the stomach, right? And there's space in the nostrils, in-breath, out-breath, which allows in-breath, out-breath. And we're sitting in the space of this room. And the distance between the center and, say, where? Golden Gate Park or Gardens, there is space, right? And there's vast space between, say, San Francisco and Los Angeles, right? Wider space. And the distance between San Francisco and, say, Miami, greater space. And there's greater space between planet Earth and the sun, or planet Earth and the other planets in the solar system. And there's vast space between the sun and the closest stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And there's immense space between the Milky Way galaxy and the closest galaxy in the universe. And when all these elements come together to form a human body, we say it is male or female, and we give it names. But if you look deeply, there is no permanent self or ego. Only the process of body and mind, only earth, water, heat, and space. And then we come to the sixth element, the element of consciousness. The sixth element. And consciousness is considered an element because without consciousness, we wouldn't be aware of life and daily experience, and we wouldn't be aware of the other 5 elements. So this was one of the meditations that the Buddha taught. Quite amazing. Now, we don't have time to get into atoms and cosmic energy. So, be well, be happy. Be well, be happy.